So imagine a startup that, secures millions in early funding,
Right.
and they use it to build this massive state-of-the-art campus filled with luxury amenities. But then virtually overnight, the whole thing just goes entirely bankrupt.
Like a total crash.
Exactly. The funding completely dries up, all the employees scatter, and this multi-million-dollar campus is it's abandoned to the elements.
Just left to rot.
Yeah. And you'd probably think I'm talking about some 21st century tech company in Silicon Valley, but this exact cycle, the explosive ambition, the sudden wealth, and the total catastrophic collapse that was happening well over a century ago.
Right out in the dirt of the American West.
Right. And you, listening right now, have probably flown right over the remains of these empires without even knowing it.
It is, it's just a remarkable parallel when you really look at it, because when we study the 19th and early 20th centuries, we are looking at this era of just hyper expansion.
Oh, absolutely.
Pioneers were crossing these blistering deserts and the Great Plains to build new lives on land that, Native American tribes had inhabited for thousands of years.
Yeah, a massive, massive shift.
But the venture capital of that era, it wasn't server space or software. It was cattle, it was farmland, and the ultimate driver of human frenzy, gold, silver, and copper.
And that is exactly what we are taking a deep dive into today. We're exploring the hidden history of American expansion, specifically through the lens of 4 forgotten frontier towns.
Right.
Our mission here is to understand the intense boom and bust cycles that really define these settlements. We want to extract the human drama of ambition, disaster, and, in a couple of cases, some incredibly bizarre reinventions.
Yeah, to really grasp the sheer velocity of that scaling process, we kind of have to establish a baseline first.
Okay, lay it on me.
We need to look at a place that proves just how fast a settlement could explode into existence out of absolutely nothing, and then how quickly invisible market forces could just wipe it completely off the map.
Right, so that means Rhyolite, Nevada is our starting line.
Exactly.
So the year is 1904. 2 prospectors, Shorty Harris and E.L. Cross, are just wandering the Nevada desert, and they stumble upon a vein of quartz. And the defining feature of this quartz is that it is just absolutely loaded with free gold.
And finding visible, free gold in quartz, that is the 1904 equivalent of a blank check.
A total jackpot.
It triggers an immediate, chaotic rush of prospectors. They named the resulting camp Rhyolite after a local volcanic rock that's scattered all over that region.
Right.
But what happens next is what really separates Rhyolite from just your standard mining camp. The growth wasn't just fast. It was aggressively opulent.
And see, this is where I have to pause, because I always have this Hollywood stereotype in my head of a Wild West town.
Oh, sure, the muddy streets and all that.
Yeah. You picture a muddy street, maybe a couple of rough wooden saloons with the swinging doors, guys covered in dirt, but Rhyolite just completely shatters that image.
It really does.
We are talking about a town that built a stock exchange. They built a board of trade, multiple hotels, and heavy industrial foundries.
They even had an electric plant.
Which is crazy.
Think about the logistics of that for a second.
Yeah.
In the first decade of the 20th century, many established cities on the East Coast were still struggling to fully transition to electric light.
Right.
Yet here is this town, right in the middle of a brutal, unforgiving desert, and it is completely electrified.
And the luxury amenities are what blow my mind the most. The residents were importing high culture at an absurd premium.
Oh.
They had a symphony orchestra, they built an opera house. They were organizing formal baseball leagues and holding basket weaving classes.
It really demonstrates a very specific kind of hubris. When that much wealth is pulled directly out of the earth, the people extracting it want to prove they aren't just roughing it on the frontier,
Right, they want to show off.
They want to prove they have arrived. And that attracted massive institutional money. Charles Schwab, the steel magnate, he actually purchased one of the local Rhyolite mines for several $1 million.
Wait, several $1 million in 1905?
Yes, in 1905 dollars.
That is an insane valuation. It's literally like finding a high-tech corporate campus with a kombucha tap on every floor, a rock climbing wall, and a resident string quartet just dropped into a barren wasteland.
That's a great way to picture it.
With Wall Street titans like Schwab throwing millions at it, it must have felt completely invincible.
But that feeling of invincibility was their biggest blind spot. Their entire existence was tethered to a single commodity.
The goal.
Exactly. But more dangerously, their survival required an immense, continuous flow of outside capital to fund the heavy machinery and the payroll necessary to actually extract that gold.
So they were vulnerable.
Extremely. They were the mercy of macroeconomic forces they couldn't even see.
Which brings us to the sudden death of the town. And this is the part I really want to dig into because the gold didn't just vanish overnight, right?
No.
The mines didn't collapse. What killed Rhyolite was the financial panic of 1907. But wait, I have to ask, if the gold is literally still in the dirt in Nevada, why does a stock market panic 3,000 miles away in New York City even matter?
That is the crucial mechanism of a boomtown economy.
Yeah.
Mining at that scale isn't just a few guys with pickaxes anymore.
Right.
It requires massive industrial mills, heavy equipment, and huge labor forces. And all of that runs on credit.
Ah.
So when the panic of 1907 hit New York, credit markets essentially froze.
Meaning banks just stopped lending money entirely.
Overnight, the liquidity completely dried up.
Mm-hmm.
So the Eastern investors who were funding Rhyolite's operations suddenly called in their loans, or they just stopped sending cash. Without that constant influx of capital, the mining companies couldn't make payroll. They couldn't buy parts for the mills. The gold was still there, sure, but the financial machinery required to pull it out of the ground was broken.
So Wall Street sneezed and Rhyolite caught a fatal case of pneumonia.
Precisely.
It's just a terrifying domino effect. By 1911, the mills in Rhyolite had completely closed, and by 1916, they turned off the electric lights for good.
Yeah.
A town that was hosting operas just a decade earlier went entirely dark. Today, the only things left standing are the concrete skeleton of a bank and a bizarre house made entirely out of glass bottles.
It is the perfect illustration of how tangible wealth in the ground is totally useless if the broader financial ecosystem collapses. Rhyolite wasn't destroyed by a natural disaster. It was erased by a ledger in New York.
Okay, so Rhyolite shows how vulnerable these settlements were to invisible capital markets. But what happens when the money is still flowing, the economy is strong, but a physical catastrophe hits?
Right.
Like, does everyone just pack up and leave?
Yeah.
That takes us to our second town, which is St. Elmo, Colorado.
Yeah, so we are jumping slightly back in time to 1878, deep in the Sawatch Range, about 20 miles south of where Buena Vista, Colorado sits today.
Right.
This is a classic gold and silver rush scenario. But unlike the flat desert of Nevada, this is rugged, mountainous terrain.
Now, before we get into the economy of this place, I have to bring up the name because it is just hilarious to me.
Oh, the naming story.
Yeah, so the camp was originally called Forest City, but apparently there were too many other places named Forest City, and the Postal Service was getting confused.
Very common issue back then.
So they had to rename the town, and they chose St. Elmo. Do you know why?
Well, the story goes that one of the founding members of the town was passing the time reading a very popular, highly romantic 19th century novel called, you guessed it, St. Elmo.
It is so bizarre. I mean, you have to picture the reality of this town. At its peak, there were 2,000 people living there. And it was populated almost entirely by single male prospectors. The main businesses were loud dance halls, rough saloons, and brothels.
Very rough.
It was gritty, it was violent, and they name it after a romance novel. That'd be like walking into the toughest, most dangerous bare-knuckle biker bar in town and finding out it's called The Notebook.
It really highlights that strange desperation to project refinement over a very rough reality.
Yeah, totally.
But despite that chaotic environment, St. Elmo was actually building serious, sustainable infrastructure.
Right, because by 1881, the railroad arrived, which is usually the holy grail for a frontier town's long-term survival.
Exactly.
They became a major supply hub. They built a schoolhouse, a telegraph office, sawmills. I mean, they even had the time and resources to publish a weekly newspaper called The Mountaineer.
The Alpine Tunnel was operating nearby, cattle were being driven through, the mines were producing. St. Elmo was hitting a stride that most towns only dreamed of.
Nah.
But then, in 1890, a devastating fire ripped right through the commercial district.
And it burned down several key businesses. And this is the inflection point, right? Because for a single industry town, a fire isn't just about replacing wood and glass.
No, not at all. It forces a brutal calculation.
How so?
Well, when the infrastructure of your town burns, you have to ask yourself, is the remaining ore in the ground valuable enough to justify the immense cost of rebuilding everything from scratch?
Ah.
And for the investors of St. Elmo, the math just didn't add up anymore. The best veins were already tapped out.
So the outside capital leaves, the mines begin to close down, the Alpine Tunnel shuts its doors, and the vast majority of those 2,000 residents do the only logical thing: they board the last train out of town.
Right.
But not everyone left. And this introduces a new dynamic to our deep dive: the holdouts, specifically a family named the Starks.
The Stark family's decision to stay is just a fascinating study in localized economic adaptation.
Yeah.
They didn't just stay in a burned-out, dying town out of sheer stubbornness. I mean, maybe a little bit, but they really recognized a shift in value and orchestrated a complete pivot.
So walk me through the mechanics of that pivot. Like, how do you actually survive in a town that just lost its only industry?
You look at what resources are left. The Starks realized that while the silver was gone and the heavy infrastructure was burned, the incredible natural beauty of the Salwatch Range was totally untouched.
Oh, wow.
They were running the local general store and a hotel. So instead of trying to cater to non-existent miners, they started actively renting out their cabins to tourists and summer vacationers.
That is brilliant. They essentially transitioned St. Elmo from an extraction economy into an experience economy decades before anyone was even using terms like that.
Precisely.
They stopped selling pickaxes and started selling the scenery.
Exactly. And because of that foresight, the Stark family managed to sustain themselves there for decades.
Yeah.
They froze the town in time.
And their strategy actually worked in the long run. Today, St. Elmo is technically a ghost town, but it was never erased like Rhyolite. It's incredibly well preserved.
Very much so.
Some of the buildings were eventually taken over by the Buena Vista Heritage Museum. Oh, and in the early 2000s, it gained a massive reputation among paranormal investigators for being haunted.
Which is the ultimate irony, if you think about it. The Stark family pioneered tourism in St. Elmo, and a century later, the town is still drawing tourists in just a different demographic, looking for a different kind of experience.
It's the ultimate long-tail business strategy. So St. Elmo survived by becoming a preserved museum piece. But I want to head south to Texas now because our third town offers a survival model that is completely unhinged by comparison.
It really is.
I mean, total cultural reinvention. We're looking at Terlingua, Texas.
Terlingua brings a much darker, heavier industrial reality to this discussion. In the mid-1880s, prospectors rushed to this area of Texas near the Mexican border.
Okay.
They weren't looking for gold. They were mining quicksilver, which we know today is mercury.
And mercury is incredibly toxic to handle.
Highly toxic. But at the time, it was absolutely vital for various manufacturing and industrial processes, including munitions.
Interesting.
The settlement actually started as a small Mexican village situated along Terlingua Creek, and it kind of grew alongside the Marfa and Mariposa mining camps.
Right. It started with a small workforce of about 300 laborers in 1902, but by 1905, the population swelled to over 1,000.
Yeah, it boomed.
They had a hotel, a school, and they even secured public telephone service, which was a massive logistical achievement for that remote area. But eventually, the demand for quicksilver plummeted.
And as the economy declined, the social realities of the town became even more stark. It's really important we don't romanticize the frontier as some egalitarian blank slate, you know.
Absolutely.
Even as Terlingua was dying, strict segregation was enforced among the population. The town directly mirrored the deepest structural inequalities of the country at that time. It was a divided, struggling industrial camp.
That is a vital piece of context. I mean, we're simply looking at the sources here, and it's clear these weren't utopias. They were hard, often unjust places to live. So after World War II, the quicksilver industry essentially collapsed. The town emptied out. The local post office even packed up and moved to a different mining camp nearby, though they did keep the Terlingua name.
Right.
For all intents and purposes, Terlingua was dead. Just toxic dirt and abandoned buildings out in the desert.
Until the late 1960s and 70s, when an entirely new mechanism of survival is introduced.
And this is where it gets crazy. How do you resurrect an abandoned, segregated, toxic mercury mining town?
You start a chili cook-off.
I mean, it sounds absurd, but it worked.
It really did.
It is the ultimate rebranding campaign. Talk about shifting the narrative. It would be like a heavy industrial chemical plant shutting down, rusting in the sun for 20 years, and then successfully reopening as an artisanal food hall and craft brewery.
To understand the mechanics of how a chili cook-off saves a town,
Yeah.
you really have to look at the power of spectacle.
Right.
They didn't discover a new vein of ore. They created a legendary, eccentric culinary competition that acted as a massive public relations stunt. It created a cultural gravity.
People just started driving out into the middle of the harsh Texas desert solely to prove they could cook the best bowl of chili.
Yeah.
And once thousands of people start showing up for an event, well, you suddenly need infrastructure again. You need places for them to stay, places for them to drink, places to buy supplies.
The sheer willpower of that event pulled the local economy back from the dead. Terlingua replaced a resource extraction economy with an event-driven economy. Today, it actually holds the title of the chili capital of the world.
And it isn't just an empty festival ground either. People actually live there again. As of 2026, roughly 170 people call Terlingua home year-round. They literally cooked their way out of being a ghost town.
It proves that a community's survival isn't strictly dictated by what is buried in the ground beneath it.
That's a great point.
It can be sustained simply by the shared desire of people deciding to gather in one place, even if the initial reason is just a bowl of chili.
Which sets up a perfect contrast for our fourth and final town. Because Terlingua survived by using an event to draw thousands of people in from the outside world, right?
Right.
But Staheken, Washington survived by doing the exact opposite. It survived by keeping the outside world entirely locked out.
Staheken is located deep in the North Cascades of Washington state, and the name itself actually gives us the earliest historical context.
Oh, yeah.
It's derived from the Salisha Native American culture, and it translates to the way through.
Right, because long before white settlers arrived, local indigenous tribes utilized this very specific geographic corridor as a vital route to cross the treacherous mountain passes.
Exactly.
So it was historically a transit hub. It was a place you moved through to get somewhere else.
Exactly. But in the 1880s, the inevitable wave of gold prospectors arrived, looking to strike it rich in the mountains. They built a settlement, hoping to build, the next Rhyolite.
But the gold eventually ran out.
It did.
But instead of packing up and leaving, or, I don't know, starting a chili cook-off, the settlers in Staheken just pivoted to farming, and they did it in total isolation.
And that isolation is the defining characteristic of Staheken. There were no roads leading into the town back in the 19th century, and there are absolutely no roads leading into it today.
Wait, I have to push back on the mechanics of this because it honestly sounds impossible.
It does sound pretty wild.
You are telling me that in 2026, there is a town of about 95 permanent residents, and you literally cannot drive a car to it. How does a community survive like that? How do they get groceries or medical care or building supplies?
It requires an intense level of self-sufficiency and a total reliance on alternative transit. Access to Staheken is strictly by boat up Lake Chelan, by float plane, or by hiking in on foot.
Wow.
So if you need a refrigerator, it comes on a boat.
Yeah.
If you need a doctor, you are getting on a boat or a plane.
They are completely off the mainstream power grid, too. They still use a historic one-room schoolhouse for the local kids. And honestly, I really question the label of ghost town when it comes to Staheken.
How so?
Well, Rhyolite is a ghost town. It died. Staheken never died. It just stabilized at a very specific, intentionally small level.
That's very true.
If Rhyolite was a rocket ship that exploded in midair because Wall Street cut the fuel line, Staheken is like a glider that caught a thermal draft and just settled into a permanent, peaceful holding pattern.
That is a brilliant way to frame it. Staheken is an exercise in intentional limitation. They aren't trying to scale up.
Yeah.
They aren't trying to attract venture capital or build massive hotels. They have preserved a bubble against the extreme hyperconnectivity of the modern world.
The irony of its history is amazing to me, too. A location that was literally defined by Native Americans for its utility as a transient passage, literally named the way through, ultimately became a permanent, immovable fortress for 95 people who absolutely refused to leave. It went from being a place you pass through to being a place you hide within.
It fundamentally challenges our modern assumption that growth is the only metric of success. Sometimes, survival is just about finding a quiet corner of the map, realizing you have enough, and shutting the door behind you.
Which really brings this entire journey into focus. We have looked at 4 drastically different trajectories of American expansion, and each one reveals a different mechanism of survival or failure.
We started with Rhyolite, a town that built an opera house in the desert, only to learn that physical gold cannot save you if the distant financial markets decide to turn off the tap.
Then we explored St. Elmo, which watched its primary industry physically burn to the ground, but survived because one family had the foresight to realize tourists would pay just to look at the mountains.
And we saw Terlingua, a town burdened by toxic mercury and deep social segregation, which managed to resurrect itself from the dead through the sheer cultural gravity of a chili cook-off.
And finally, Staheken, a community sustained not by a boom of wealth or a massive influx of tourists, but by a deliberate, roadless isolation. The through line here is the relentless human desire to build and maintain a community against all odds.
Whether that means chasing an overnight financial boom with everything you have, or just trying to find some peace and stability in the quiet aftermath when the rest of the world has moved on to the next big thing.
So, to you listening right now, the next time you are looking down from a plane at vast empty spaces across the American West, or you are driving down a lonely highway and see a rusted sign pointing down a dirt road, remember that those aren't just empty spaces.
Not at all.
They are the former stages of immense ambition, wild venture capitalism, and intense human drama.
And it leaves us with a compelling question about our own future. As our modern industries shift, as remote work decentralizes our massive tech hubs, and single industry factory towns face obsolescence, what will the ghost towns of the 21st century look like?
That's a great question.
When the metaphorical gold runs out in our digital era, will our communities find their own version of a chili cook-off to survive? Or will the servers simply power down forever?
It really makes you wonder if our gleaming tech campuses today are just the Rhyolites of tomorrow, waiting for the lights to dim. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us. Keep questioning the map, and we'll see you next time.